Oh, hey. So it's been exactly 2 weeks since the last Studio Diary entry, and I've had a few hours here and there over the past couple weeks to add a little bit more to the track. So I've added a few more layers, did a little bit of sound design, recorded a few more guitar parts, and started doing some basic mixing, and generally organizing the track. And so I'm just going to go over what I've done thus far, and then got my cup of butter coffee here, as per my usual morning ritual, and that ought to fuel the day, so let's get into it. Alright, so as you can undoubtedly see, there's been a whole bunch of stuff added since the last time. I have the sidechain trigger track basically matched up with the kick and the snare, just like I usually do. That's chained to the sidechain compressor here, which reacts and ducks everything out by, I think, an 8th note or 16th note every time the kick and snare hit. The other thing I did was I took everything from this machine track, like all the machine drums, and basically just isolated the kick, the snare, and the overheads. Basically rendered them out into audio. That way I can process everything a little bit separately. And also added this snare, which came from a Daniel Bergstrand, who's one of my favorite Swedish metal producers. He released a Drum Shots sample pack. And so, because I love the sound of his, just how big his snares always sound, like this is what it is on its own. It has like a very big, roomy sound to it. And so I basically layered the body and the tail of that with the machine snare to get, as well on the drum bus, I have everything routed out to, I guess first of all, there's like this SSL drums to plug in, which actually came with my SSL interface, but which I got that like way near the beginning of the year, but I only started using their stuff now because I figured, hey, I have it, came with it, so why not? Trying something new. Sounds really cool so far. Been digging their stuff. And everything else is routed out to this room reverb, which is also an SSL, one of the other plugins that came with my interface, just to kind of tie everything together, make it sound nice and like it's, even though they're electronic drums and hyper processed and all that stuff, but it just makes them sound as if they're actually a real kit in a real room. Yeah, so I started adding some of these crashes and stuff, and started putting in some noise transitions just to tie everything together. Taking from the original Scratch MIDI track that had all the notes in it, I actually started assigning them to different instruments. So here I have the two basses. This is a Pigments patch. I think it's just one of the presets that I found and tweaked a little bit to match what I wanted the thing to sound like, and then that's layered with the sub. So and then as well I started going through a bunch of Native Instruments expansion packs that I recently acquired, because there's some really cool growly sounds and things that I wanted to take and kind of make my own. So the expansions provide me with a good starting point, because they're just like a bunch of massive presets and stuff. And then I would just go in there and tweak these to match the track. Everything from those little kind of snippets. And then I also layered a bunch of those to get this kind of gnarly growl thing. I think that's like 4 or 5 different patches, all different, like processed differently and then layered together and then resampled back into Ableton, so just to form one cohesive sample, just because if I had all of them running at the same time, they'd probably make my CPU explode. So I just kind of simplified all that. I don't have the original MIDI tracks anymore, unfortunately. I had to kind of delete them to save processing power and stuff, but all in all, they sound like this. Thus far, here's what it sounds like. on it goes. And just a few of the sections repeat after that. The one other thing that I was experimenting with, and this is a riff that came into my head, I think about a week ago is when I actually started putting this together. Yeah, it mirrors what goes on earlier in the track, this sort of time signature flip. So it alternates between 3/4 and 4/4 timing, which is kind of interesting. Just like a thing that got stuck in my head one morning and just decided to try to map it out, and this is how it made sense to do it. Yeah, the drums do this. Then when you play everything together, because the guitars also mirror what the bass is doing. And then this section is what I'm probably going to focus on today. But yeah, so that's what I've got thus far from the last couple of weeks. And I guess we'll see where today takes me. All right, so it's some number of hours later. And whereas I thought I was going to start working on that other section in the latter part of the song, but instead I pretty much spent the entire day just layering stuff. Doing sound design and just generally thickening things up. So just kind of what I ended up with. So essentially what I did was just add a lot more layers behind the guitars. One of the main things that I'd focused on was the actual drop. And that includes this kind of these juxtaposing growls playing off each other. And this guy was basically me resampling and chopping up and modifying and then processing and then resampling again. And then adding all these filters to a pigments patch. And of course, after spending all this, I probably spent like an hour and a bit on just this thing alone. And ultimately, it's a very subtle thing that blends in with the background that kind of weird on its own, but rhythmically it fits with the rest of the stuff going on. But basically, as before, a little virtual channel to simulate the sound going through an analog console. A bit of EQ. With just like low and high pass filters, ducked out a little bit of the low mids, and just added a little bit more highs just to kind of make it sound a little more crisp. Saturation, then the actual filter. A tube screamer. More EQ. An Eve preamp that was driven pretty hard to the point of overdriving, so I had to turn down the output quite a bit. But it has like a very nice warm analog distortion to it. And then finally, this gatekeeper pulse just to give it a little bit more rhythmic feel. And then with the context of everything else, so subtle. The other main thing was adding all these sort of saw chords. which I copied over and I'm probably going to use later in the track. Kind of classic trance saw build, whatever form that may take later on. Yeah, the other thing was this main lead here, which is a Pigments patch, going through a Neve preamp, pretty heavily driven again, through the analog console emulation, and then a Neve EQ, just a couple of very subtle strokes, and an LA2A just to level it out a little bit. Finally, during the verses, I had these kind of seventh plucks using Massive. Layered with the organ. And there's this other lead, because while I was searching for the main lead sound, I found another really cool one that I find has done a pretty good job of layering underneath the guitars and a bunch of other parts. That was kind of the gist of it. It's just like a ton of layering and processing and messing around with different sounds, and ultimately pretty stoked with, because even without the guitars, the chorus sounds pretty thick. And then with the guitars, everything else. So in the next session, I'll probably start writing the rest of the track, because all this stuff is pretty well done. I mean, I might add some more layers to it after the fact if any ideas come to mind, but for now, I'll just leave it as is and move on to whatever is going to go there. But that's for later.